I'm Rebecca Gifford Goldberg. I am Bellwether's managing partner, and I am delighted to be here today to talk with this amazing panel about mergers and partnerships and how they can happen from a position of strength and how they can be a courageous move. We've assembled a pretty remarkable panel of CEOs and former CEOs, and I'm excited for you to hear from them. More nonprofits and schools and networks are facing really tough decisions, and we've heard about that throughout today, about their future, given the funding environment, the political environment. This is a moment for all of us to think differently about what long-term impact can look like, including, hopefully, thinking about whether and when and how mergers and acquisitions can be the right next step. Given our tight time today and the dark room, we're going to talk more about the what and the why of mergers than we are about the how. And for some of us in the room, action-oriented, not talking about a friend, not about myself, I can understand that might feel frustrating. And so before the end of the session, we're going to make sure to give you information about how to follow up and learn more about the how of what mergers and acquisitions can look like in our space. We're going to keep it tight in introducing the panelists so we can get right into the conversation. But I want to start with Lacey Robinson, is CEO of Unbounded. She self-describes as obsessed with how organizations evolve, and in that context, oversaw the integration of both Pivot Learning, a nonprofit, and Core Learning, a for-profit, which was a subsidiary of Pivot Learning, into Unbounded in 2022. Nicola James founded Edwell to address urgent needs about educator wellness during the pandemic. Edwell was ultimately integrated into Reach University as a key component of their educator wellness approach. And Dominique is the CEO of Brick Network. He led the merger of 2 charter schools within Newark, New Jersey to create a K-12 pathway. He did so in a charter context that required really deft navigation of political and policy considerations. And at Bellwether, I had the chance to support the merger and integration of education board partners into Bellwether a few years ago. And I'm delighted to see that we have Carrie Irvin, the co-founder of that organization, and now a member of Bellwether's senior leadership team in our audience. So before we dig in, I want to say this is a topic with lots of emotional and intellectual heft. And it is highly reasonable that there will be a range of perspectives in this room and on this stage about what role mergers and acquisitions can, should not play in our sector. And I don't think we will have done our job today as part of this summit community if we don't find ourselves disagreeing with each other, and so want to create space for that disagreement. So as we dig in, and because it's dark in the room, we want to get a quick pulse check of who is here with us, because it's going to help us tailor this session. Can you raise your hand? We're going to do 2 rounds. Raise your hand if you're a nonprofit leader or team member. All right, lots of those in the room. Raise your hand if you're a school or network team member or educator or leader. Got a couple of those. Raise your hand if you're a funder or an intermediary representative. Got some of those. Raise your hand if you're an advisor to leaders and organizations. All right, we've got some of those. How about a board member? This is not mutually exclusive of the other one. Many of us are board members. I'll raise my hand. And then other, will we miss something? Shout it out. For-profit. For-profit. Thank you for joining us. All right. All right, we're going to do one more round. Raise your hand if you have never thought about mergers or acquisitions in the context of the education sector until you decided to come to this panel today. This is brand new for you. Okay, not interesting. Not a lot. Raise your hand if you have considered a merger or an acquisition before in your work, for any of the hats you wear. All right? And raise your hand if you've done it before, been engaged in a merger or an acquisition process. Okay. So you can see we are across the spectrum here, but mostly not brand new to the concept of mergers and acquisitions. And with that, I do want to name, as we begin to hear from our panelists, just a quick note on language. I'm going to go here. Yes? Yes. I'm going to go here. You heard me talk about education board partners merger into Bellwether. Technically, a merger is the combination of two legal entities into a new legal entity, and technically an acquisition is when one entity becomes part of another entity. In our space, and you'll hear about the different language that was used, we often use the term merger or partnership to compose both of these things because of sort of the corporate vibes or challenges that can come with the word acquisition. And so we'll talk more about that. With that, I'd love to start with you, Lacey. What was your strategic why for thinking about mergers and acquisitions? And how did you think about that as an opportunity rather than a move of last resort?
Well, the strategic why sounded a lot more sexier than the way it ended up being. Honestly, at the core of it, it was really about the reach and impact of our work and just this sheer desire within our organization, in our enterprise now. We consistently talk about the moments that we had as educators and leaders in our buildings and realizing that you were on an island. Nobody was coming to support you, to teach you, to hold you upright in your instructional practice and trajectory, but everybody was coming to be voyeuristic on your academic scores. And so for me, the further we got into the work and the more we kept hearing from our partners in what I call the edusphere, I kept wanting to figure out what was the multiplier. What was the fastest way to get the reach and impact? And I'm going to be real. People who know me are like, okay, yeah, when are you not? What was the most impactful way, honestly, of shifting the funding conversation so that it wasn't just this inauthentic dance between what they wanted and what we wanted, but could be a true partnership?
So you made the brave choice to raise the question of being acquired with your board. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we had just started a school year. We kicked off. Things were feeling really strong. I saw we had about 10 months of runway, and the funding picture was looking challenging. And so for me, I really stepped back and thought, what do we do really well as a relatively new organization also? What are we doing really well, and where are we struggling? And came to the conclusion that our mission continued to be important, our work needed to continue to exist, and the parts we were hard at, fundraising, sales, getting into districts, we didn't have to do that alone. There were other ways to reach our core beneficiary, which was teachers. There were other ways to reach teachers beyond being our own institution that went out and convinced district after district to work with us. And so we wanted to see other ways to pursue the mission more sustainably.
Go ahead.
So we are a place-based, multi-generation continuum that supports children and families from cradle to career. So in our continuum, the board and I had a conversation, which is that we had a wonderful maternal health strategy. Babies are being born or going into our elementary school. We have a wellness center, we have a housing unit, and then they drop off in 8th grade, and then they come back to us in either post-secondary work or in our hybrid college, right? So we had a gap in our model. And unfortunately, in the state of New Jersey, the approval for a new charter school was just impossible. And this was at the current administration when they got reelected. And we took a stab as a board and just had a conversation like we have to basically either wait another 4 or 5 years in order to basically finish our continuum, which is that missing link from 9 to 12, or we can find a partner that is in our community that be willing to kind of come join us in this effort. And so that was for us was really about our strategy, which was we need to support children and families all the way from birth all the way up to college and career. And we have this missing component of our model, and who can we can start it ourselves or we can find someone out there that can join our network, and that's what we did.
Hold that mic, because we're gonna go backwards this time. I've heard some folks in this conversation, funders, authorizers, others say that if a nonprofit or a charter school or a network can't succeed on its own, right, that the best answer, particularly in this funding climate, is to close, right, versus merging or being acquired. What's your reaction to that?
Well, for me, I would say it depends on the market. If you're in a market like New Jersey, New York, I think the best option is not to close it. It is actually to find a willing partner to support that school and either take it over or have that school join our network. And I say that for a couple of reasons. The kids are there. And so why are we going to displace kids and families? Because the building is not in the best position that it is in terms of the leadership and the teachers and all the good stuff there, the systems that are not being there. So there are successful turnarounds when you have the resources, and that's why I say the context. So like New Jersey, New York, we have funding in terms of per pupil that allows for us to actually run quality schools, but there's other states that do not fund schools in the way that they should, right? So I think it's about the context that you're in, and I'm just such a proponent, do not displace children and families. That's the least resort that we need to do. They deserve a place to stay and stay for the time that you promise them that experience. So I am always a fan of, if there's a willing partner out there, which there's tons, authorizers get it into the room, make the tough decision, tell that founder or that board they have to go, and we're putting the school up for RFP. And I have found a lot of authorizers sometimes are not willing to have that tough conversation. They really just shy away from it and let the school dwindle out the vine. So I would say keep it open.
And I think the maybe like flip side of that is also, we've also heard in this conversation, mergers are a real threat to identity of nonprofits, right? And that nonprofits each have their own values, their own mission, and maybe you could talk a little bit about, given your circumstance, how you thought about navigating that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so there's a few things I think about with identity. There's the culture and the values of the team, and then especially as an early stage nonprofit, there's the identity of the leader, that's me. And so that was absolutely part of the process and the conversation. And so to your earlier point of like, they should just close if they can't make it work, I think that's an oversimplification, because I think especially with early innovation, the time and cost it takes to prove your outcomes at the scale that is required to then get the contracts that are required to be at a scale that is sustainable is really hard. And part of that is the cost of overhead, the cost of building out a sales and marketing team, building out a fundraising team. And so that's where, for me, it was my own identity as a leader came in as well, too. It's sort of, I stepped back, I saw what are we doing really well, as I mentioned, and where are we struggling? And I believe in our mission. So what would it take for us to succeed on our own in the next 3 to 5 years? What capacities and skills would we need to build? What would I have to spend my time doing in the next 3 to 5 years? And I really took stock and took a hard look and decided those skills were not why I got into the work. I got into the work to be with people, to support educators, to support their humanity and their social emotional development. And pitching my org to district HR leaders wasn't a skill I even really was excited about building. And so like there is a selfish component to this, I will say, around the leader has to have a hard conversation with themselves around where do I want to be putting my time? What are the skills or even like the gifts that I have to bring into the work? And you get to make that choice. And I think that M&A is a way to start thinking, how can I keep my mission alive
and still be doing the work that I most care about.
I didn't think you were showing. All right.
Yeah, I want to say something. So I want to bubble this up because this is a moment I think for all of us in the edusphere to stop and consider, like, well, why are we doing this work? It blows my mind. I'm gonna say it, that millions of dollars goes towards programs, R&D, and the programs that they see the results that they want, and then people sit in a room and just like, let's let it go away. It blows my mind. And so I go back to, like, what are we really trying to do? Are we really trying to educate the masses? Are we really trying to push innovation? Are we really trying to change the GDP in this country? Because if we are, then the conversation wouldn't start with, we should just let them shut down. The conversation would start with, where's their proof point? Where is it working? Okay, if they can't sustain on their own, how can we be the people that help them collaborate and get together? And so I would go back to the question of the people that are asking that and ask, like, well, what's your true intention in this work?
Lacey, that's maybe a good place to turn to. We've talked a little bit about why you did this to begin with. Talk about the successes and the challenges of what it was like to go through the merger and acquisition process.
So I think I want to name my M&Ms. So from being in the process, well, let me say this. I was a kindergarten, second grade teacher. I never saw myself in this position. I don't have an MBA. I wasn't even convinced that business should be a part of, like, who I am as a leader. But I knew I was an entrepreneur at heart, and it was something that I allowed myself to grow into. And the more and more I got into the work and, like, the research around M&A, the more and more I began to see it as a success, as a tool for success. So I started journaling about it because I wasn't taking a course or a class. And what I realized is that there were 5, what I call the M&Ms of M&A that came out. So where the success and failure begins is the mission. Like, whether you're being acquired or you're looking to be acquired, like, what is the mission? Like, the why behind it? Because, as you said, that's going to drive you to determine whether or not you should be looking for partnerships because you know that you can't do sales or you're not interested in that. The second is the mindset. Like, why are you doing it? If you're, like, doing it out of desperation, I don't know about you, anything that I do in a desperate mode does not yield good results at all. From, like, trying to lose weight to finding a house to whatever. You should not be desperate. Like, you should have a mindset around, I'm going into this process not just because I'm watching our funding dwindle, but because I want this work to go on. Your match. Like, who are you looking for? And it shouldn't just be like Tinder matches. You should be looking at, like, Match.com or Hinge for, like, you should be more serious about who you're trying to match yourself with and not just who seems like, who gets the most, I don't know, callbacks from the philanthropic partners. Money. It costs money. It costs money, whether you're being acquired, whether you're merging, and, like, can your budget sustain that? And then finally, my last one is mercy. You gotta have mercy on yourself first as a leader because you're gonna make mistakes. And those mistakes have reverberating repercussions because they flow back down to the very people that you're trying to serve. You got to have mercy with yourself. It is not an easy process. A lot of emotions are at play. And sometimes as a leader, you don't even have time to monitor and to temper your own emotions because you're trying to help support everybody else's. So my success and failure was in all 5 of those pieces.
Nicola, do you want to talk a little bit about, you had a fairly structured process once you decided that you were thinking about, integration or acquisition. Can you talk a little bit about what that looked like?
Yeah, I mean, I think fairly structured that we made something up. And we were like, let's see if this works. I will say, just on the, like, successes and challenges, the biggest challenge was deciding to do it. For sure, because of the identity things, the ego, my board, letting down my team, like, that's the hardest part. everything else, like we figured it out. I would say in terms of a structured process, I was very grateful to be well, first of all, to have a board that was very on board, with this idea, and then connected me to people that they knew, including Carrie, who gave me a ton of advice to kind of shape the process that we would take. And so what we did was, again, as a small new organization, we had to think, what is absolutely the thing that is the most value add about what we do? And then what's the stuff that we think it works well, but we could be wrong. Like, it's still a hypothesis. It might not be the way to do things. And for us, that, we narrowed that down to get, like, what are the most essential things about us that should continue to exist, that we believe should continue to exist no matter what. We then did a huge brainstorm of, for Match. I mean, I love your M&Ms. I want to talk to you about that. But for Match, we thought about profiles. So what are the types of orgs that we could take? Tall, dark, and handsome, athletic. No, we were thinking about we could go with an organization that trains teachers, an organization that delivers social emotional curriculum to kids, and maybe they want to expand and work with adults. So we thought about where might our mission and our work and our value be added value to someone else's mission. And that was a few different types of organizations. From there, we built this big spreadsheet, and then the dating really started. I mean, it's actually, like, people talk about this in dating metaphors a lot, because you do move from just the initial, like, going on a date to then getting into a more of a committed relationship. You make it official, you sign something, okay, we're really looking at each other now. And then you make it exclusive, and that's another big step. And then, so I had to learn all of that from people who'd done it before. But then the last, big part of our structured process was our evaluation rubric. So any org that got past, the first date, which, let me just tell you, I went on 50 and we ended up with one partner. So there's a lot of no's, but any org that got past that first step, my whole team was I have a team of 4, so we were all part of this process, and we all evaluated that potential partner across our rubric. And that had everything from the ability for the mission to continue, team, our core values as an organization, and would they continue to be represented? Were there opportunities for the team to continue to work at that new organization? And then there was a row in the rubric about recipients of the work. Who would we be working with, and is that still aligned to our mission? And that was how we ultimately ended up at Reach.
Dom, you named, when we've talked about this, that obviously it was worth it, and it was really challenging. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I also put it in context. So this was actually our second merger. The first one ended horrible, where we had to break off from them. And that's when I contacted Bellwether and Rebecca and said I wanted to do this differently on our second go-around. So even with the learnings of the first time, going into the second time and really spending, to your point, an entire process, I think about 18 months that we worked on this with Bellwether, there were still challenges, right? Because you got to think about this. The bigger the organization, the more they are of an institution, they have a culture, and you're trying to mesh two cultures together. So there's going to be stories told about each other's culture. And the amount of weight and energy it takes as a CEO to go and have individual conversations and build relationships, it is a lot of headspace and emotional energy that you put towards it, because it's just not brass tacks. And, it required me personally to go and talk 15 minutes to build culture. With over 100 staff members, from the janitor to the clerk to the teacher to the principal, right, across the organization. And even with that, there were still moments of time where you sit back in staff meetings and you just hear things, you're just like, what? No, we don't do that here. And you're just like, why would someone believe we do that here? So even with all of that, so I think the one thing that really kind of struck me is that not spending enough time and energy on what does it mean to work? And this is just one example. There's lots of examples. And this, We have a very unique way of working as an organization. And I would say we're also an organization that was primarily led by people of color. We are probably 80% people of color as an organization. The organization that we kind of worked with was the opposite. So that alone created a lot of tensions in the way that you work. Because there's just different cultural things that come from a majority organization of people of color to a non-majority people of color. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just the fact of the matter. And so with that, in that, we just started to see things prop up left and right. And you're just like, how do you navigate through all of this, especially when the former leader is still there and still in their capacity? And they're in a capacity that is different because now they were, in this situation, it was a standalone school, and now they're joining this big network that is just more than schools. It's housing as well. It's like, it's a bureaucracy, to be transparent with you, right? So it's just like, now they're over here, and you're just like, no, you can't, things don't go underneath the rug. If you fail, it's a domino effect, and then you're held accountable. In a small setting, you can kind of, maneuver things around. So that was like, all of that was just like constantly building on the notion of culture and working with people. And I would just sum up, like, it takes a lot of energy from the leader. You cannot think you can just do this all technical stuff, which is important. It's necessary. But don't underestimate the necessary adaptive work around building relationships and the leader being out there, because this people will consistently tell stories that they will make up in their head, and you're just like, I don't know where you came from with that, but we're going to rock with it right now, and we're just going to work through this.
I mean, it's interesting. One of the things that really resonates from what you said is when Bellwether and Education Board partners merged and were integrated, what we were effectively doing was hiring a person and getting the benefit of expertise and intellectual property. And yet, it was a lot of work, right? And it was a person, Carrie, that we knew well, that we had strong relationships with, and still. It was a lot of work. And so I think that, not underestimating the people work involved in this is pretty critical. And I'm curious, Lacey and Nicola, from both places, you've been on the acquirer and the acquiree stage, how you think about sort of the people part of this.
The people will eat the reason why in the first place. It is, I learned very early on in my leadership walk that you have to invest time in relationships. Never underestimate that culture will eat policy every single time. Don't underestimate that talking to an individual for 15 minutes, walking away and thinking, that was great, that other cultural affects aren't going to come into play. And 15 minutes later, your entire conversation you just had just slid out the window. Right. So people, I'm going to use a term, I use this all the time internally, my people get tired of it. It's really easy to map out the technical. So easy. The difficult is the adaptive. And that is where truly the work is around the adaptive. And so I tell anybody that comes to me that's considering this, I don't want to hear about how much money or how it's going to help save it. I want to hear what's your plan about the adaptive work with the people who are going to be affected by it, even those people who will be exited out, because their ghosts will come back to haunt you.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that on that list of what were our greatest assets, what are the value add that we could bring to any organization, very high on that list was my team. I thought, outside of me, here are 3 really incredible, smart, talented, dedicated people who know a lot about educator well-being, about social emotional learning, and that became part of the pitch as when I was with organizations and out on the field was, you could hire Stephanie, who has the master's in this and has the experience in this, and you can hire Erica, and that was a big part, I think, of how our deal got done, was that they saw we're not just bringing on a set of programs, we're bringing on a team of people who have been selected, who have been vetted, who we trust, and who already know how to work together. And if you've ever done hiring or built a team, like that's really valuable to be able to just get that in one fell swoop.
So, because my merger with Education Board Partners was all about governance, we've talked mostly about team and staff in this conversation, but a merger and acquisition is actually a board decision, right? And so can you talk a little bit about what it looked like for your board to be, when your board was engaged, how your board was engaged, what that looked like from an enabling or a challenging perspective as it relates to this?
Yep. Really important. I think if you haven't done the board work beforehand, it's going to make it really hard. The work before starts even before you're thinking about the activities. You should have a relationship with your board so that they understand the kind of leader you are and the type of innovation that you're into, so that when this work comes about, it won't become a shock. The why is really important. The why is really important because you have to keep coming back to that. And then for me personally, the how. I had to build confidence in my board that the M&A activities, and it was really an acquiring, because even though you use merger, it really wasn't acquiring, that activity was not going to place additional financial burden on the organization. And so that was the other big piece.
Yeah, I feel very lucky that I had an amazing board that was very supportive. I mean, even to the point where I would start a board meeting and give them the updates on programming and fundraising, and they would just kind of cut me off. Like, we don't need to know about that. If you're pursuing a merger, this is what we should be talking about the whole board meeting, because this is your number one priority. And so I was really lucky to have that. They connected me with a lot of great people. And yeah, my first advice to anyone considering is, like, your board should be part of this process because they can help you a ton. Your network and their network is going to help you find your potential partner or landing place. So definitely engage them.
I would just add one thing, which is also during the due diligence process, involving a couple of board members in the actual process, like begging them to be at all the meetings because, they're busy people. Being participants in the conversations, in the focus groups with staff members. So then when it comes to it, and ideally it's the board leadership. So we ask all the board chairs of both organizations to participate, which was a huge lift. But in the end, it worked out because they had a relationship when things were going left or right, that they can get on the phone call and say, hey, we talked about this. What do you think? What I think? Let's hash this out because this should not be an issue. We already talked about this. So I would say encourage board chair to beg them, please give me your time to participate in these conversations.
One of the most common questions I get about mergers and acquisitions is, how long does it take? Like, what's the minimum timeline? I don't want to leave them, I'd love to hear both what you think the answer to that question is and also what the answer actually was for you all. And if those two things are different, that'll be an interesting learning experience for all of us.
I don't think there is a timeline, right? Of course, there's the pre-work, there's the due diligence, then there's the marriage, and then it's just like marriage. It's ongoing work. It never ends. All right. Well, sometimes they do end, unfortunately.
The dating advice portion of this panel will take place after the panel.
But no, seriously. I mean, we are year 4 or 5, and I still think the work is still going. It is. It's just consistent work, especially if you're keeping the point of the talent, right? Because a lot of these mergers, it's not about the balance sheet. It's about the talent. And the talent comes with people, and people will be peopling all the time. And while they're peopling, you got to work through that, and that never ends. So I would say, I wouldn't put a time on it.
Let me follow up.
Okay.
From the time you first thought about the fact you wanted to fill that high school lane to the time that you announced that you were integrating.
Right. So I think that was in when we were launching our last strategic plan. So that was in the strategic plan conversation. So we had launched it, and probably year 1 we had found a partner, and I think we worked with this school and also at Bellwether. I think it's about 18-month process. Yeah, about 18-month process that we did due diligence, and then we did the official merger, and now we are in year 4, I believe, or year 3 of that.
And could it have gone faster?
So we were gun shy because we had experience of a school before that did not work well. So I want to put that disclaimer out there. We probably had some emotional trauma from that experience. So this time I was willing to go as slow as possible to make sure that this is right, because it's a reputational hit if this does not go well. And we took a reputational hit when the first school did not work out. So this time we went very slow and asked a lot of questions, and still things were uncovered once the merger was actually officially approved. So I'm going to say we went slow. I think it could have gone faster if you didn't have the emotional trauma that we had from our first experience.
When I originally thought about M&A, people know me know this, the idea came up because I was obsessed with Succession. And I was like, well, we'll just acquire something quickly. But then when I went back to rewatch Succession, I realized that one of the companies they were trying to acquire, they never actually got through it. It took us 24 months for the technical. I'm not saying the adaptive, for the technical, 24 months. 12 was just the ideation, the dating, the figuring out the process and all of those pieces, going through the due diligence, the legal. What state is the business registered in? That plays a really big role. Yes. Then another year to go through the actual activities, and then another year to do then the people, the culture, the program, and it never ends. That's the other thing, is that it never stops. It is the evolution of a business. And so I think the technical is 24 months, at least it was for us.
I can offer a slightly more optimistic view if anyone's on the edge of their seat with their own merger. I had the first board meeting to discuss it in September, and we merged July 1st of the next year. So it was 10 months. Add on maybe a few months prior to that, September, of my own introspection and crying and journaling. So maybe a year. But I think we were able to pull it off in 10 months. I had 10 months of runway, so that was part of why we had that timeline. And I knew if I'm going to really go at this, I'm not going to be going after big grants at the same time. I don't have that capacity. And so it kind of, I would say it made us say, this is, here, what options do we have with the 10 months that we have? And it honestly helped, because if you're the smaller org getting merged or acquired with the larger one, they would love to go slower because they have so many other priorities, and this is your number one priority. And so being able to say, like, we need this to happen by July 1 was actually helpful for us. But I wouldn't say, you asked, is there a minimum? I mean, like 6 months, 8 months, if you're lucky and you're small. Like, I do think it takes time. You can't do this. Don't come to us if you have 3 months of runway. It's going to be really hard because it does take a lot of time.
So it's interesting. I think there's also, speaking from the perspective, I think we had our first conversation with education board partners probably 6 months before we were signed, sealed, delivered. But Carrie, how long had you been thinking about it? Cold calls.
Scared me. Okay. I had been thinking. Whoa. Oh my goodness, sorry. My crying and introspection and thinking about it was this summer. So I went to my board in September, had a conversation with Bellwether and a lot of other organizations in October, and we were small. We had runway, but I really wanted to be able to use some of that runway for severance. I wanted to be able to give my staff runway, so we had an MOU signed at the first of the year. It was really, really fast. And then it was official, and I started on March 1st. So it was a really, I really credit that with my board. I had been keeping the board up to date on the ramifications of the future funding, like a year out, a year and a half out, 2 years out, into the, that maybe we'd be fine, but it was not there was a lot of questions about longer term sustainability. So I think that that's a big, earlier is better, like not waiting until you're sure that you have to merge, which is, I think makes all those identity things harder, but looking as far ahead as possible.
We basically tried to copy your timeline that you told me. We didn't quite nail it, but.
Sorry.
It would not have been a good ending to this panel if I had injured one of my colleagues as a result of a cold call. So I would add, I mean, I think if Bellwether's chief operating officer were here, she would say we did it too quickly, right? And so I think there's a balance there, and like, despite the fact that as an advisor and a consultant, I would love to be able to say, well, it takes X to Y months, and if you do A, B, C, I do think it's a pretty wide range that depends on a lot of factors. We heard about the board engagement, the size of the organization, the size of the acquiring organization, the people involved, the complexity of the work. Am I missing anything?
I mean, I'll just add that to the point of like, there's not a lot of resources out there. I was frantically Googling like how to do a nonprofit merger and found some PDF that said you need 12 to 18 months, and was like, fuck, I don't have that. And then I talked to Carrie. But so there aren't a lot of resources out there. I'm glad we're having this conversation. I think the resources out there will tell you it takes a long time, because in big nonprofits it can.
Yeah. I started writing my own blueprint because the resources are so limited. And halfway through, I recognized I was very lucky that I had people on my board, and the leader of the organization that we were M&Aing with also had resources. But I went outside of actually the educational nonprofit space, and I went to the Fortune 500 companies and those leaders and really got from their perspective. That helped a lot. But I would say the resources are going to be a really huge factor.
All right. We are going to turn things over to you all to see what questions you have for us, and then we'll spend the last 5 minutes or so hearing whatever you guys didn't get to say yet. So what questions? Chris is going to help us with questions.
I'm not helping with the questions. I'm going to help run to the questioners.
I will cold call, as you saw me do.
If you could go back and get support from a funder or others who are thinking about this work, partners in the field, what kind of support would be most helpful to you as you navigated this?
I have a quick answer. As like a smaller newbie to the field, the biggest support is connecting me with the people who I want to merge with, because I learned the hard way that even if you have someone in your network who's not super senior at that org, you can have a conversation with them, but at the level of M&A, you need to be talking to the CEO or the ED. Otherwise, it's just not going to go anywhere. And so I think that's like a very concrete way that if someone comes to you and says, we're trying to merge, we're considering these organizations, can you help me get in front of the ED? That could be it for them.
I think at least from my experience, being the acquirer, wanting that have that original effect of reach and impact, I would have loved my funder partners to be more curious about, so let's talk about your sales plan. Let's talk about your marketing. What's your funnel? What's your B2B? Like, what's the next 3 to 5 years? And not just look for proof points. Because, yeah, I could go, we have ideas, we have what we've been doing, but maybe this coming together is going to require a different kind of thinking about business modeling. And, like, don't make the assumption that we have all the answers.
Nicola, you mentioned sort of your own emotional journey. I would love if you would share a little bit more about, like, for the founders in the room, what is that journey of sort of letting your little, it feels to me a little like letting your baby go. How was that part of the journey for you?
You may have teed me up a little bit on this, Amanda. I got to, can I share? Yeah, Amanda also has done a merger recently, and got to help support her on that process, which has been fun, so congrats. Yeah, so around the time that I decided to pursue a merger, I had my second miscarriage, so I was also losing other babies. And so that is, I'll be real, that's like a big part of the process that I went through. And of course, I'm not gonna lie, of course it was really hard to say. I think the hardest part as the founder is, for me, was feeling like, okay, I went out on this limb thinking that this would work, and I got other people to do it with me. So they took a risk on me. You know, I had a colleague who was the year behind me in graduate school and came to work with me and could have gone from her MBA to like a much higher paying job. And so I felt the obligation to the people who I had brought along, and that was really hard. And then of course, to the mission, right? But I think with the merger, you're feeling like, okay, I'm doing this because I believe in the mission. I still think it can work. So I was able to get around that part faster than the people part. And I think I kind of already said this, but I'll say it again, like just everyone gets to do what brings them joy and makes them feel like they're bringing their gifts to the world. And even if you work in social impact and you work in education, you should still get to spend your day getting lit up by your work. And I got into this because it was something that lit me up and that I really cared about. And then I learned what it takes to be a nonprofit CEO in a declining economy, and I was like, this is not me. This is not the skills that I want to invest in. This is not what I want to spend the next 3 to 5 years doing. Maybe I will 10 years from now or 15, but right now, with everything else that was going on in my life, it wasn't right. So yeah, if anyone, whether it's my situation or a completely different personal situation, if anyone is just like in that early founder identity phase, like let's get a coffee. I love talking about it and just helping people like look at the different sides.
Hi. I think this question is probably directed at Lacey. I was wondering about your experience with acquiring a for-profit startup, and how that's different. Like, what is different about it?
I'm looking across because one of my for-profit leaders there were both of them in the room, but one of them is here. She might be better slated to answer that. Being completely transparent, it was a part of the big dream that I had around building the reach and impact machine. Part of my goal was to move my relationship, our org's relationship with philanthropy, so that it was more collaborative and not codependent. It still is. Because I do think that it should be a true organic relationship where we are both seeking the same goal. We're both thinking about the same R&D affects. We're both looking at the same hypothesis and seeing how that hypothesis can make a difference with children. And so the reason why I was really interested in the for-profit was because we are building a machine where one end actually supports the other through innovation, resources, talent, sales. And so that's what sort of drove the other piece of it. It's so interesting to watch a for-profit. They can come up with an idea, and within 6 months, boom, it's out there in the space. And they are running because everything that they eat, they have to hunt and kill. And that's the way they describe it to me. And they do a lot of hunting and killing. So it's been, to me, extremely, extremely very joyful to watch, if I can use that word, because it's another form of educational reform, but in a faster paced way. And so I would tell people, don't shy away from the for-profits.
Probably have time for 2 more questions. Yeah. Oh.
I don't see.
I was wondering for, do you go by Dom? Dominique. Do you have any, are you willing to share any of the kind of learnings or what happened with that first merger or merger attempt that didn't go well?
Oh yeah, just go to newspapers. No, so seriously, I went into that as a young whippersnapper, I would say. Eyes wide open because I had relationships with many of the board members and many of the people in the organization. They had recruited me to take over of their network from the original founder. So they were retiring and they wanted me to come take this job. I'm like, I already got my job over here. So I was like, I have a better solution. Let's just merge the two organizations. You want me? I'm not leaving over here because it's a strategy. So I went into that with relationships with people that I knew in the community who looked like me, went to church together. And when the power dynamics came up and someone had to be the decision maker, which is ideally the CEO, right? Not in the eyes of many people there. And the politics came in, you're not hiring my wife. I mean, it was seriously, yes. I had a board member who was upset that we were not hiring his wife as the principal. It was just a lot of cultural nonsense that took place there. So I learned from there never to trust people. Because if I can be in church with you and we share the holy bread together, and then on Monday you kicking my back in and basically trying to destroy me, something wrong with that. And that's when God said, you only should trust me. I'm a person of faith, all right? So that's when I just learned not to trust people. And I learned to trust processes and courageous conversations, structured conversations, and having the real time to say, are we really aligned in doing these things? So that was a growth moment for me, to be transparent with you. I think I elevated myself as a CEO from that experience. It hurt. I mean, it hurt me to my core. I mean, you're in the newspaper and you're just like, I'm like, no, there's a belong.
I got the chance to observe you then in the second merger process. And one of the things that I really appreciated was how often you were mining for conflict, right? Like, we gotta find the places where we don't agree. No, wait, I don't think you're saying the same thing I'm saying, and we've gotta have this conversation. And you did that relentlessly and courageously in that conversation. And so I think that I saw you learn that lesson for what it's worth.
All right. Thank you all so much. I'm curious, another colleague asked a question about how philanthropy could be supportive with, sort of the implementation supports. And I'm curious if there's a role, or what would have been an ideal role for philanthropy when you were dreaming, and what philanthropy could do to help people dream differently about how to work together.
I would say, first and foremost, the resources. So, again, it's not cheap. So helping us find the right legal, that's a whole nother panel on having the appropriate M&A legal. Thinking about the matchmaking, thinking about the product development, like what is happening afterwards? Because now you're coming together and you could try to keep doing the same thing you're doing, but new things are going to need to be born. And so, like, what does that mean? Integration cost, sunsetting one organization. There's a lot of resources that go in. I think, and I say this often, I wish there were philanthropic concepts that you could apply for that specifically were about post-M&A.
On the earlier side of things, I think I felt really lucky to have a PO at a funder who's hosting us all today, who's no longer here and I don't think is in the room, but who I felt like I already had an honest and open enough relationship that I could call him and say, like, here's what I see as our strengths and our weaknesses. Like, what do you think? And what do you see in the rest of the market? And how do you think these strengths might be of value in the rest of the market? And so just going in with a really trusted thought partner where I felt like I could be honest and open, and he was so supportive and in that early brainstorming. So I think it's like it's starting really early and building the relationship with the founder.
I wouldn't take it in the context of where we currently are right now, which is because the nature of what the work that we do, I see a diversity of CEOs from all different sectors in the nonprofit space or social service space. A lot of people are not going to survive. And I think there's a funding community, even the state community, I mean, our state governments, our city governments, is to start connecting the dots to understand who's going to survive and who's not, and start doing the matchmaking now, because to your point earlier, are we here to serve the people, or are we just here to serve organizations? And it's not that they're not going to survive because bad leadership or anything like that. They're not going to survive because they're just tired. And why do this work when every day I'm waking up and it's a constant threat of everything that I worked for, and I don't know what is left and what is right, and what is the norm and what is procedures. I thought this is what you do, is, A plus B, but no, right now we're in a world where it's not even alphabets. It is, we don't know. So I think right now this is such a pivotal moment for all nonprofit sectors, from the health community, the education community, housing community, all of them, to start really starting to think about what are we doing in our communities, and how do we start to look at each other, and are there moments of that we can ideate and dream about consolidating services, consolidating this work to have better systems of back offices in order to do these things. Because I am truly, truly afraid, because I see it all the time, right? In the work that I am in, and I'm seeing these CEOs just battle day in, day out, trying to have balance sheets, trying to do payroll, trying to do this. This budget line was cut, that was cut. I don't know what to do. They're stressed out. They're not going to survive. Organization, this is going to be an M&A season. If you're in corporate America, M&A, there's certain seasons where M&A is strong, and this is an M&A for nonprofits. And so how are the funders and how state governments and city governments, county governments, going to start connecting the dots and getting these things together?
30 seconds or less. One more, okay.
So the question is, based on what you said, who would you point us to help facilitate that, or are there people in the room who are involved in facilitating those types of conversations? I think the foundations could play the biggest role, because they fund and they can see the portfolios, right? And many of the large foundations can start to say, all right, let's start to connect the dots in our portfolios and true assessments of who's going to survive. And that's not a negative. Like, I want to repeat, like, this is not because people are not doing their jobs. It's because that when I'm having my check-in with the CEO, they're tired. I have a relationship with them. I can see that they have maybe 12 months runway. So I always want to put a disclaimer that never walk away that bad-mouthing CEOs. It's not because they're doing bad work. It's because they're tired. So I think that's the person that can do it.
30 seconds or less. What hasn't this room, and what haven't I asked you that we should have, and what do you want to share?
How are you? Because even the CEOs that are surviving, it's still hell on both ends.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And it's interesting that everybody knows that the house is on fire and you stayed inside, and nobody has asked you if you need water.
I'm just going to double click on that. Probably a month ago, I had a funder call, and they asked me that question, and I actually broke down crying, because no one had asked me since this entire season. It's only been almost like only 100 days, but it seems like it's been forever. But every day I was waking up, greenhouse reduction loans were cut. So my capital stacks for 200 housing unit buildings that we're building done. The food delivery service was cut. So that was cut, right? So it was like a constant week. It was like 6 things that had hit me. And I'm stuck there as a CEO with my board trying to figure out how the hell I'm going to still get these projects done that's draining our coffers, because we can't build, we have to do pre-development costs. How am I still going to get the mills over here, right? And it's just, they stop and say, how are you? And I just broke down. So double click that.
I'll double click on the mercy piece and the self-compassion of how hard it is. I think if you are a founder or ED, most of your job is going out into the world and convincing people that you are damn sure that what you're doing is amazing and it works and it's gonna keep working. And to go through this process, you have to fundamentally change your mindset, and you have to be able to say, some of the things we're doing are working and some things are not, and can I really critically look at that with my board and with my team? And that's a shitty process to go through. It's also emotionally draining, and it's almost a code switching. If you're out there fundraising and you're doing this process on the inside, you're like, everything's great, we're so awesome. Oh my God, what are we gonna, so that is hard and that is tiring, and yeah, we can talk about it if you want.
So I want to thank all three of you. And thank you for sharing so much of yourselves and being so vulnerable. So if we can give them a round of applause. When the four of us first convened with the amazing support of NewSchools to talk about this, one of the things that all four of us said was, we don't want this to just be one conversation, right? We want to ensure that people have, coming out of this conversation, the support they need to think about next steps. We talked a lot about the why and the what, a little bit less about the how. We got some dating advice mixed in there. But want to make sure you see that here we're going to host two conversations, follow-up conversations, the same conversation, to join either of them to talk a little bit more about the what. And we'll make sure to include Lacey's 5 M's in the conversation so that you can see those. But please feel free to join us. And we're also going to stay up here, and we're happy to try to answer questions or lend support. At the end of the day, though, I want to go back to, this isn't a checklist, this isn't a toolkit. This is very much people work and adaptive work, and I think you heard from 3 really courageous leaders who have done that work to help support young people and to support the work that we all do. So thank you, and thank you for staying awake in the dark room.